Question is about WikiLeaks. I think that's an excellent question, and let me say that what WikiLeaks stands for, above everything else, is the claim that transparency is good. Right? If we just have transparency, life will be better. We'll all know what's going on. That's not always right. Now, you guys are a little young for this, but you haven't been married. I don't think. But you've probably lived with parents. Do you want to know everything? Do you want them to know everything? What WikiLeaks stands for is that if we all know everything, we'll all trust each other. I find that unlikely. Life depends upon deception, concealing, mystery. I mean, how would you love someone without them being a bit of a mystery? And the problem that the age of WikiLeaks offers is that our entire lives will be made transparent, public and private. It's not clear that diplomacy could work. I mean, this was of course the United States' arguments against WikiLeaks, right? How can you have meaningful diplomacy in the world if people know what you actually think? No one will trust anybody. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, first of all, one thing we should be aware of, the thing to compare WikiLeaks to is the Pentagon Papers release, right, by Daniel Ellsberg about 40 years ago. We actually just celebrated, I think, the 40th anniversary of it. In both the Daniel Ellsberg case, the Pentagon Papers, and the WikiLeaks case, at least the main ones that we're talking about, there was almost nothing in them that we didn't know. I mean, name for me a fact that was in WikiLeaks that no one knew. There were none. I mean, everyone, the first week after WikiLeaks came out, the reaction was, oh my God, it's going to be the end of the world. The second week was, oh, we all knew all that. Nothing really new. This was another one of those instances in which the secrets were things that were in plain sight. And for the Pentagon Papers, it's much the same. And so, what I'd say is, having them published in WikiLeaks doesn't actually reveal, for the most part, new facts. What it does is it takes away the innuendo and the mystery and the deniability and the ability to say, well, we're fudging this. That is essential for all relationships and all diplomacy. Yes, you want to follow up? Again, one could look at each particular case, right? There aren't many facts that I know of that WikiLeaks revealed that weren't known to people, and there are certainly, as far as I can tell, nothing changed in the world post WikiLeaks. It's not like suddenly everybody now knows that Pakistan's a country that has some Islamic elements in top places in it, and that we're worried about that. We knew that. all that we have now is we have our diplomats on record telling other diplomats, these people that we're trying to work with, we hate and we have no respect for. Possibly. I think people did know it, and I don't think people know it more now than they did then. Let me put it that way. If people want to ignore it then, they'll ignore it now as well. All the way in the back. Back up.
I'm curious about the relationship with this idea of facts and opinions and the relationship of fear to that, the public imagination. This idea that, well, it's frightening to think that I look at 35% property now kind of thing. It's frightening to have buildings in Manhattan hit the Pentagon and everything else. And what's the relationship of fear to this learned effect?
I think it's important. I think the fears you're mentioning are right, and I think there's no doubt that what we're seeing is a rise of uncertainty, and that this feeds this need to believe in something. Arendt would go a bit further and say that it's a kind of metaphysical fear. She talks about our age as the age of homelessness and rootlessness. This is to go a bit afield, but I think it's important, because the point is that for most of history, we have lived, in small groups, families, and communities, and we've known who we are, right? Poles, or Jews, or Americans, or English, or Anglo-Saxons, or Greeks, or Islam, Muslims, etc. And largely we had a sense of rootedness and belonging in the world, and it gave us a certain purpose. Arendt is part of a philosophical school that has its roots in someone named Martin Heidegger, and others, Nietzsche, as Friedrich Nietzsche as well, that thinks we've entered an age in which we don't have any set purposes. Nietzsche calls it the Schwergewicht, the heavy weight that gives meaning to our world is lost. And that creates a deep need and uncertainty and fear for why we're here and what we're doing. And she says that leads to a desire for belonging, to belong to some group, to believe in something. And thus we have an incredible propensity today to adopt and adapt ideologies and believe them. And even when WikiLeaks is published and shows us that our facts are wrong, we still believe them. That's her point. I guess this is what I want to say the WikiLeaks question as well. Arendt's point is you can publish every fact you want. People aren't going to believe them. Because if people need to believe in their world, and their ideology, and their way of thinking, it's not going to matter what facts are out there. And the more fear there is, the more they're going to cling to their created worlds. Whether it's metaphysical fear, or whether it's the fear of pensions, or whether the fear of terrorism. So I think that's exactly right. Go over to this side, yeah. Can you stand up, please? I'm having a hard time.
Listening to discuss distinction between what's true and what's false makes the midterm distinction between what's right and wrong. So when discussing right and wrong, can these categories have factual value, and can they have objective factual value?
That's a great question. The essay that Thomas mentioned at the earlier part, Why We Must Judge, is about that, the one I wrote, and certainly Arendt has written a lot on this question. I think it's in Truth and Politics, the essay you're reading, but not in the parts you're reading, so if you go and look for it. She talks about her belief at one point in the Socratic maxim that it's better to suffer wrong than do wrong. You understand? So it's, if you have a choice of suffering and being wronged, or doing wrong and not suffering, she says what Socrates taught is the moral maxim that it's right to suffer rather than do wrong. She says that is probably the only moral fact in Western civilization. And she says the only reason it became a moral fact, that it got established as a fact, is the force of Socrates' personality and his example, and how it's been sort of the leading example of what a moral person has been for 2,000 some odd years. And she says that in Western society, we've taken that as a fact of morality. But she also says that in the last 100 years, that fact has disappeared. That people have given up and now question that Socratic fact that it is better to suffer wrong than do wrong. She says, if they question that, if people will actually say, well, you know, it's actually sometimes better to not suffer, right? A utilitarian argument or something. If people are going to question that, which is in her mind is the only basic moral fact, there's nothing left. And so to her, that's a fact, but she would admit that today it's no longer viable. Yeah.
She also talks about how academic institutions are the truth tellers, but it looks like not seeing how much they or our academic institutions
You're going to get me into trouble. The question is about academic institutions as truth tellers. Well, first of all, let me say she doesn't think that's the case today. I mean, in the essay, what she says is that's what they should be, and that's what they emerged as places outside of politics. But I think it's very hard for anybody to look at academic institutions today and see them as depoliticized. This is, to a large extent, although not exclusively, a carryover from the revolutionary changes that our universities in this country and around the Western world at least went through in the 1960s, when students, you know, occupied buildings in Columbia and Berkeley and Harvard and other places and insisted that politics be brought front and center into the academy. Those students are now the tenured faculty around the country in universities today. And most of them are from the left, which is why most people on the right in this country, even many who went to universities, don't put much faith in or stock in the truth-telling capacities of, or at least many people, I don't want to say most, of the universities. Which is why it's important for universities, if you want them to be places where truth-telling happens and can be nurtured, we have to strive to depoliticize the university. That doesn't mean we disengage from public questions. That's what I'm trying to say. It means that we understand that to engage in public questions, we can do so on a question of intellectual integrity and truth rather than politics. But it's a very hard thing to do. And one of the things you'll have to judge as you go through 4 years of college is how often your teachers and your professors rise above politics and teach you something true, whatever political position it comes from. And how often you're going to accept that, or you're going to say, but what are the politics behind that? What are the assumptions behind that? Isn't that just, you know, some kind of political presupposition? Because that's often the way students in this age react. They want to know what are the political implications of things. And that's not wrong to want to know that. It's our job, I think, at our best, to raise you above it.